affect the electrical industry. The webinar will last approximately an hour. The presentation should take approximately 45 minutes, and there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the webinar. So on conclusion of the presentation, we'll review any questions and answers that have been submitted. You can submit the questions and answers via the icon at the bottom of your screen. You'll see it on the bottom of your screen from the left. There should be icons, and there'll be a Q&A icon fourth in the row at the bottom of your screen. We'll also maybe deal with some of the more common questions that arise in respect of gas and electrical installations. We'll try our best to deal with all questions and answers that are submitted. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Calum Mansell. As I mentioned, Calum is the Technical Safety Manager from CORGI. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, as Bob introduced me, I'm the Technical Safety Manager on the electrical side here at CORGI Technical Services. Today's presentation is obviously going to give you an awareness of gas installation as an electrician. And before we do that, though, I'm just going to talk a little bit about CORGI Technical Services and what we do. Well, CORGI Technical Services for a long while now have been providing support and guidance to the private rented and social housing sectors, along with the facility management sectors. We do this in a range of different ways, which includes electrical and gas auditing, consultancy, training, technology, membership and accreditation, and investigation and expert witness. So if we are familiar to yourselves, CORGI Technical Services has been around for a long time, obviously quite famed for the gas originally, but we also have an electrical division. In terms of gas and electrical auditing, what we do is we go out in the field and we provide quality control. So that's checking maybe completed EICRs, completed gas safety checks, and we're making sure for our clients that they're being completed to correct standard, to BS 7671 in the case of electrical installations, obviously gas safe requirements, etc. We're looking at when we're looking at gas installation auditing. In terms of consultancy, we do a little bit of that where a customer may have a query or an issue with something. We go out and have a look impartially and try to come to a solution for both parties. In terms of training, we do a wide range of compliance training that includes gas, electrical safety, but also wider things. So we look at the big six in terms of compliance. We've got courses for those areas, particularly for the social housing sector, facilities management organisations. We do bits and pieces like that in terms of training. Technology, we utilise the latest software to scrutinise electrical and gas documentation and other areas of documentation such as asbestos documentation and so on, and make sure the paperwork documentation has been completed to a satisfactory standard. We can do that at the touch of a button to make sure that your documentation is compliant as possibly can be. We have a membership and accreditation portion of CORGI, which is another arm, which is called ASCP, the Association for Safety and Compliance Professionals. And inside that, we've got two subgroups, which is the Association for Electrical Safety Managers and the Association for Gas Safety Managers. So in there, we do work for our members, we're part of committees along with Select. We do regular technical talks for our members as well. So all part of that builds into our services for our members. And the final one of there, investigation, expert witness, we do a little bit of that where there's maybe been an undesirable event occurred. We've worked with multiple organisations such as tour operators, the police in the past, and we've given our professional opinion over what we deem to be an incident report there. So we give an opinion, and we worked on things like Grenfell and what have you, and give technical input on those kind of things as CORGI Technical Services. So quite wide ranging. I would encourage you, if you're interested in any of those services, go to our website and take a look. But enough about that. We're going to talk about gas and electrical auditing in terms of why we would deem that a measure that you might want to consider in the future. Well, gas and electrical auditing. A lot of our customers, they are part of large organisations who need to meet certain regulatory responsibilities, And there's a quote up on the screen there from the HSE, which says that large public and private sector organisations should have procedures in place for auditing and reporting health and safety performance. So it's an additional level of assurance that we carry out to make sure that our customers are compliant as they should be. So that's the message around gas electrical service auditing services that we have. And I said you can find out more of that from our website or by contacting myself and John at the end. Our emails will be up there. Okay. Right. Today's session then. What have we got? What are we looking at? Well, we put together today's session based on some of the things we find from our gas and electrical auditing. So we've got John today as our gas expert, who's going to give us a bit of insight into the gas requirement as electricians that we need to be aware of to make sure we don't fall foul of anything in terms of compliance, and making us aware of those key bits the gas engineers are looking for when they're out doing their inspections to make sure their installations are compliant, and how we can assist that as electricians. So we've got consumer unit distribution board distances, ventilation and distances from flues, cable entries for boilers and gas meters, protective equipotential bonding, that will be discussed as well, and finishing up with a little bit on carbon monoxide alarm installations to the British standard 50292. Okay, so I'm going to bring John in 1 second, but just to make you aware of this document, this is called the Gas Safety Regulations, and its full title is the Gas Safety Installation and Use Regulations 1998 as amended, set safety requirements for gas appliances, fixtures and flues. A little bit like our electricity at work regulations. So John, can I bring you in there on this one and just discuss a little bit about what this means to the gas world?
Yes, Calum, thank you. The gas safety installation use regulations are fundamentally a set of safety standards in the UK that govern the installation, maintenance and use of gas appliances and systems. There is some key points which I'll make you aware of around these regulations. It specifically talks around the safety of gas systems. It talks about competent installers, the necessity for regular inspections, landlord and homeowner responsibilities, and a little bit about consumer safety as well. The approved Code of Practice is currently on its 5th edition, entitled the L56 edition, and it was amended in recent years. And the amendments were somewhat, minimal, but it was more centred around, certain issues that previously had a bit of a grey area around them. For example, when we came across situations that perhaps in domestic properties where the meter wasn't working or it was an unmetered supply, how could we confirm we'd correctly and safely worked on the appliances concerned? So this is the fundamental guidebook, if you like, for all gas-related work in the United Kingdom, and it's used in conjunction with the Health and Safety at Work Act to ensure that all work is compliant and safe in properties, both domestic and commercial.
Okay, thanks, John. And there's one particular regulation that stands out more than most for not just gas engineers, but electricians as well. Regulation 8, if you want to give us a little bit of briefing on that and what that means to the
Absolutely.
other trades.
Yeah, Regulation 8 is of the gas safety installation use regulations is a crucial, very important piece of legislation in the United Kingdom, because it deals with the safety of existing gas appliances and premises. It essentially prohibits any alterations to premises that could potentially compromise the safety of any gas fittings. Some key takeaways from that, just to summarise, is that you're not allowed to undertake any alterations that would affect safety, and it applies to everyone, whether that be the homeowner, tradespeople and landlords.
Okay, and some of those examples that electricians might get in, might fall foul of there is the installation of extract fans and stuff like that, John, that you've seen in the past out in the field where people have maybe installed an extract fan and not taken account of Regulation 8. And it is obviously a regulation, is there for a reason. And we'll just talk around that then, John, and some of the issues that you might get. So we've got a picture there up on the screen. What's happened on this one?
Well, this picture is taken from a pre-existing home. where the flue just to the left of the back door there previously terminated correctly into the outside air. Subsequent to that, there was a annex or an extension built onto the side of the property that now meant that the flue from the gas appliance was now terminating into an internal habitable living space and effectively making it an immediately dangerous situation. Bearing in mind that one of the sole purposes of the regulations is to ensure that we safeguard life and property, clearly this is compromising, human health.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about the picture there on the far right. Obviously shows a cable there which is burnt out. Not directly a breach of Regulation 8, this is, John, but this sort of sets the scene for later on in the presentation, where we will be talking about some of the other things electricians need to be aware of and some of the other standards that need to be aware of. Just to finalise out the pictures, I'll just give you another example. We've got another picture here, John, if you just want to talk around this one. And this one actually has got an after effect of this one, hasn't it? We'll talk about it in a minute, but what's going on here? What's the issue?
Yeah, simply put, the issue here is that, again, we have a pre-existing installation that has been subject to some alteration and refurbishment. The builder has sought to encapsulate the appliance flue, which is responsible for discharging the products of combustion or the fumes direct to outside environment. They've obviously encapsulated it in a confined space, and again, that will give rise to carbon monoxide and fume production within that property.
And there we go. That's that particular case there, where a company director fined for dangerous construction work around a boiler. And so the building company and its director have been fined for unsafe construction work around a domestic gas boiler, which resulted in a gas escape. So yeah, it is a real thing, and people can get prosecuted. And what are some of the things that can be done if someone is found guilty of Regulation 8, breaching Regulation 8? Sorry, John.
Well, the ultimate sanction is imprisonment. I think it's fair to say, and normally when you are subject to the legalities in terms of attending court, you will normally be prosecuted in conjunction with Regulation 8 and a breach of the Gas Safety Installation Use Regulations. You will be seen to be in breach of the Health and Safety at Work Act as well, and that is where most prosecutions come from. You can also succumb to unlimited fines, and fines are normally based on the revenue of your individual organisation or your company. So fundamentally, the greater the size of your company, the more your income, then the higher the fines imposed will normally be. Obviously, there is reputational damage and so on that will go along with that as well.
Yeah, so very important that people are aware of this if they're working around gas installations. And yeah, so in terms of trying to link it back to the electrical world, obviously we go out regularly within domestic properties and we carry out electrical auditing, usually off the back of a periodic inspection and test being conducted and an EICR being produced. Well, in the gas world, you go out and you do annual checks, don't you, John, on your gas installations. And the document that we've got up on the screen gives gas engineers a little bit of advice. It's called Gas Industry Unsafe Situation Procedure IGEM G11. And again, just to link in around that, you use a system, a sort of a risk rating system, to assign a severity to what you find, don't you, John, out in the field as gas engineer?
Absolutely.
It's like kind of similar to what we use. So this one up on the screen, we've got an ID which stands for immediately dangerous. So if you went out in the field, John, and found this particular one, what sort of scenarios would we be looking at?
Yeah, immediately dangerous situations would, for example, be the likes of gas escapes that are out with permissible tolerance, an escape of fumes, appliances that are on fire, for example.
Okay, so very severe. And obviously, what do you do there as a gas engineer? Do you isolate the supply? And
yes, we isolate the supply by fitting an appropriate fitting, a cap fundamentally on the associated pipework. We also raise a warning notice and we label the appliance. We must always seek the permission of the homeowner or the resident before we do so, and we then offer a proposal insofar as remedial work that is required.
Okay, similar. Okay, there are some differences, but it's in general similar to what we would classify as a C1 in the electrical world then. And moving on then, so the second one that you have there, John, if you go out and do your inspections at risk. So what does an at-risk mean to us in an example, please?
Yeah, at risk in layman's terms is simply where there's a potential danger, where you foresee that perhaps in the medium to longer term that there could be a potential danger. However, the danger is not insofar immediate that there's a risk to life or property.
Okay, so similar again to our C2, I suppose you could run.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Potentially dangerous. Yeah.
Potentially dangerous, yeah, absolutely. And the final one that you have there is a not to current standard. There is an asterisk by that though, John. The asterisk being that they're not referenced in IGEM G11. Am I correct in saying that those scenarios there aren't?
That's correct, Calum. Not to current standards no longer appears in the document. It's only immediately dangerous and at risk that will appear in that document now. Fundamentally, what not to current standards is that, and to give you a sort of background and scenario relating to that, is that you come across an installation that met the regulations, the manufacturer's instructions at the time of installation. These requirements by the manufacturer or legislation have changed over time, and it's a recommendation to bring the pre-existing system up to the current standards. Now, the landlord or the homeowner is under no obligation to do that legally. It is just best advice, best practice and good practice for to advise them, so that you can give them the opportunity, if they wish, to bring their existing installation up to the current standards.
Okay, so a good piece of advice there. Obviously, you're documenting, you're giving it back to the customer to make an informed decision about upgrading the installation as necessary. Yeah.
And again, it would be similar to the C3 that's in the condition report sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, there's no an obligation to do it, but it would increase the safety or improve the installation by doing so. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, John. Thank you, Bob, for input as well. That's great. Okay, so this one of the hot topics. You find it in the field a little bit. Proximity between gas and electrical services. Well, in the electrical world, we've got BS 7671. You have a particular standard. You have got a few standards, John, that we're going to mention today, but this is one here, BS 6891, which covers the specification for the installation and maintenance of a low pressure gas installation pipe with up to 35 mil, commonly used in domestic residential premises, which includes park homes, caravan and holiday homes. How does that link into BS 7671? Well, obviously, gas is not strictly a BS 7671 issue, but we do make reference to 6891 in BS 7671 regulation 528.3.4. So we do actually make reference to BS 6891 in BS 7671. Doesn't really go a lot further than that. Some of the information you will see now are contained in other documents. You'll see it in our on-site guide, a little bit around the distances. But let's take a look at what your document says then, John, in the gas world, which is 6891, around some of these things, which are your distances. I know straight away that you use clauses where we use regulations, but BS 6891, gas service pipes should be at least 150 mil away from the electrical supply equipment. And your thoughts on the photo then, John? We have one of our electrical audits that was conducted, and our auditor very helpfully got the tape measure out to prove the point.
Yes, it's non-compliant, isn't it? I think we can quite clearly see that it isn't achieving the 150 mil that we require between any gas conveying pipework, and in this case, it's an electrical consumer unit. Yeah.
Okay. Good. And that clause in there does mention the particulars of that requirement. This applies to metering equipment, service cutouts or supplier isolators, distribution boards, and consumer units. So it is quite clear on the requirements there in terms of consumer units and what have you. Okay, there is another element to that regulation as that clause. I'm going to correct myself there. That clause as well, and it talks about gas installation pipes should be at least 25 mil away from electrical switches, sockets, and supply and distribution cables. So there we can see there. Obviously, we've got the gas bond there tied to the pipe. But you often see this as well, John, in terms of cables in and around boilers. So you can see there you've got a cable there draped across a boiler. Another reason why you might not want to pick a pipe again for tying cables to it and what have you is because, you know, as an electrician, you're not going to be the one involved potentially in the removal of that pipe. And the gas engineer changes that pipe, they're going to leave a cable there dangling in the wind. So possibly not the best choice for a support mechanism as an electrician. But equally there, John, you see this one quite a lot. I believe that one there is one of your photos from one of your audits there where you've got cables touching the pipework.
Indeed, Calum, you know, like the rest of us here today, I live in the real world, and there is a lot of scenarios that you will come across where it is extremely difficult to avoid these scenarios. However, I will caveat it by saying that we can barrier off the gap or the distance between any gas conveying pipework or appliances and electrical installations, whereby we effectively form a barrier of protection between the cabling and the gas conveying pipework. However, the distances as best practice and good practice should always be the first port of call, the first preference.
Yeah, we always advise working best practice, but obviously, again, we live in the real world and we know that gas installation pipes, consumer units underneath the stairs, consumer needs to be changed. It's very difficult to do that. What you're saying is there is some scope there within this clause which says as long as you put in electrical insulating material or interpose into electrical insulating material,
yes,
that you can actually do that. But obviously, we'd always recommend where possible you try to keep it away. But yeah, things like trunkings and you know, even wood potentially could be a solution between that gas installation pipe and electrical equipment. What is the risk there, John? Why is this a problem? What is the potential here then?
Potentially sparks are arcing onto the, you know, which could ignite the gas and potentially cause an explosion.
Yeah, so thanks for clearing that up for us. But yeah, this one has been out there for a little while. We still find it every now and again out in our audits, don't we, John? So it is one that's still out there. And we do sometimes find this on new installation work. So please be mindful of that if you are installing anything of these requirements from 6891. As I mentioned, it is in the on-site guide as well for those who have access to that document. So there we have it. Moving on to another standard, which is the BS 5440 standard, which covers the installation of flues and ventilation for gas appliances of a rated input not exceeding 70 kilowatts. So there was some change to this one, wasn't there, John? So we're pointing this one out. There was a change to the particular BS here, which is 5440-2 on the 31st of December, obviously last year now. If you can talk us through that change then, John, what actually happened?
Yeah, there was, it suggests there was previously ventilation extraction outlets fitted with non-return flaps would not have been considered an opening into a dwelling or a building. However, now the opposite is true. It is now regarded as a ventilation opening, and we must account therefore for where we install appliance flues in proximity to ventilation points that have the little air flaps on them.
Yeah, well, I'll jump into that, but this is obviously a picture from the standard, the evidence in what they're talking about in terms of the distance. So what we're talking about in terms of the provision have been removed is we're talking about these, aren't we?
Yeah.
So where they will once not have been considered, they are now considered to be an opening to the building. So in terms of the electrical industry, you're asked to go and install a fan, and there's a flue close by. You need to take this into account, don't you, John? Very important.
Yeah,
so
very important.
Tends to be 300 mil distance between them. But again, if you've got to fit a fan and you've got a grill such as this, then you need to consider that to be an opening. So it needs to be at least 300 mil away. Again, practicalities around that there, John. Obviously, you know, new fans, yeah, you need to keep it away, absolutely. What if you're asked to change a fan? What would you recommend in that way? It's an existing fan and there's an existing flue.
Yeah.
You don't meet this requirement.
There may be scenarios whereby you're fitting a fan for an extract fan during a kitchen or a bathroom refurbishment, perhaps for the first time, or indeed of a higher rating than existing. So we therefore need to take into account the proximity to flues, as you've correctly said. You should be looking at a minimum of 300 millimeters there, which is about 12 inches, no money. But where you can't achieve that, what I would be asking you to do is sort of referring to the terms of Regulation 8 that where you have any dubiety or grey area, or to confirm that you are allowed to proceed, then you should be seeking the services of a gas safe registered operative to confirm if that is permissible to do and to carry on with the work.
Yeah, and if not, don't. If they say no, don't carry on. Let
Absolutely.
and you know, you don't want to fall foul of this one. And another one, John, I just wanted to talk about really, because it's one that's not mentioned up on it, but one that we were discussing when we were putting this together, and one that you do sometimes see. What about those scenarios where maybe you go into a front room and you're asked to change a ceiling fan, or put up a new ceiling fan, or whatever it might be, and there is this scenario again. There's a fuel burning appliance in and around that area. What things should we consider?
Well, what we'll have to consider is that the installation of a new ceiling fan could cause effectively what's called flue reversal, the fumes re-entering the habitable living space. So therefore, to confirm that we are not undertaking any work that could potentially negatively impact or compromise the safety of the gas appliance, we must get the appliance checked for safety at the same time as the installation. Work should not proceed or be completed until such time that the gas appliance has been checked for continued safe operation. Bearing in mind, we have to leave that property as electricians no less safe than what you found it.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you, John. Appreciate that. That's really good. Really helpful. Moving on then ever so slightly, cable entries for boilers. Flexible cable should be adequately secured at the boiler. A failure to do so can breach the manufacturer's designated IP ratings. Yeah, so there's an image there, just one of those that we found out on our audits, where someone's trying to get through one of the designated grommets there to wire up their boiler. This is important to take account of this. Obviously, IP ratings are nothing new for electricians. You may or may not be surprised that boilers also have them as well. So IP ratings are a thing for boilers. So we need to think about ingress there. But often out in the field, we see this quite a lot, don't we, John? We've got a couple of pictures there and images of people who have, for want of a better phrase, sort of forced entry there, or sort of butchered, shall we say, the grommet on entry there. So it's very important you do that to maintain the integrity of the boiler, that you make sure you're only cutting the desired size for the flexible cable. And I'm just going to highlight that. It does say, obviously, electricians, we don't tend to look at a lot of manufacturer's instructions related to boilers. Maybe we should on occasion. And they do actually have this in these manufacturers from Baxi here. We do actually have those instructions there, which says to provide anti-splash protection, IP, always cut cable grommet to fit the cable diameter. It's very important that we ensure that we do achieve that in terms of good practice. But we do find that in the field quite often. And there we go. Just another example there of a bit of poor practice where it's just kind of slid down and it's not quite as secure as what we'd like it to be. Okay, moving on to the next section, we talked around boilers. The picture to the right is of a room sealed boiler. Okay, this one there, John, I'm going to let you take over this for a minute. I'm just going to give a little bit of brief on what we're talking about here. As electricians, obviously, we're often asked to come in and work with boilers, wire them up. Maybe it's a new boiler's been installed. Maybe a boiler's been changed. We like the gas engineers to be there when we're doing this, but often that's not the case. What are some of the risks that electricians need to consider when they are going to connect up these boilers then?
Well, as soon as we remove the casing on gas appliances, we are potentially interfering negatively with the safe combustion of that appliance. So an electrician should never be removing the appliance casing without the visit of a gas safe registered engineer to confirm that the work following the electrician's work is safe and that the appliance can continue to be left in operation.
Yeah, okay. And some of the implications around that, like you said, could lead to an unsafe situation, the
Yes.
risk associated with that. So electricians really are, if they do that, the risk is on them, isn't it? If they remove that cover,
It is.
You don't have the competency to do so. So again, bit of coordination out on site. If you do need the covers removed, you need to get a gas engineer there to reinstate that properly. A lot of the newer boilers, though, John, they kind of catered that for you, haven't they, with their their ways of wiring up, where there's just normally a drop down
Yes,
onto the boiler, so prevent you having to do that.
that's right. The lower flap in a lot of newer boilers lowers without actually affecting the integrity of the combustion seal or the combustion case. So therefore, in that case, an electrician can wire up, for example, a new boiler installation without interfering with the combustion process. However, again, where any doubt or grey area exists, you should always consult a gas safe registered engineer.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, John. Yeah, good advice there. Thank you. Okay, and keeping on sort of the cable entry, wiring, connection kind of theme. Another standard here. You got some standards in the gas industry, John. This one is BS 6400, which is a suite of standards covering the installation requirement for domestic sized natural gas and LPG meters. And inside there, we've got clause 614-7, which states installation pipework or cables shall not directly enter the property from the meter housing. Okay, so you've got a picture there. What are we talking about here, John? What's the issue and what's the risk here?
Well, clearly, in the event of an escape of gas, we have the potential for gas to be distributed within the cavity of the premises.
Okay, so people there, or engineers rather, connecting up their main protective bonding and think, okay, I'll just drill through the back of the meter box. It'll come quite nicely back into the property and I'll go up to my consumer unit. There is a risk here with that then, and obviously shouldn't be done. Now, in terms of this, obviously you've got another example here where someone's just drove through the back. Is there a difference between the meter boxes and selection of those? And it says MP and low pressure. Is there a difference there that we need to consider, or is that?
Yeah, we have low pressure installations, which is the most common found. However, we also have what are called medium pressure installations, and under no circumstances can we interrupt or interfere with the integrity of the meter box housing. We must actually come out the bottom of the box via the provided proprietary gaps or spigots that are there, and the pipework should be fed through there, as well as the electrical bonding as well. I
think for electricians, though, again, to work out the difference between a medium pressure, low pressure, unless you've got a gas engineer, may be difficult. So we'd always advise just use the proprietary spigots and entry points, and avoid drilling through the back of the boxes and what have you anyway, really, or trying to take it through where the gas pipe comes through for obvious reasons, John. We always say best practice would be to use the proprietary entry points and what have you. But again, it's a risk for you. If you did come across that and it was a medium pressure enclosure or galvanometer, what would you be looking at, John? An at risk or a
absolutely an at risk, unless it's a smell of gas or that you've confirmed a gas escape is present, which would escalate it up to an immediately dangerous situation. However, found in this scenario, per the unsafe situation procedure, it would be the at-risk procedure would be invoked.
So engineers doing this then could obviously cause a big issue if they were found to do this. They could cause an issue for not only the homeowner, but the engineers as well. You're going to have to give it an ID or an AR in that scenario. So
yes,
big issue. Okay, thank you, John. Yeah, we have another one where it's coming through the entry point there. Okay, everyone's favourite, protective equipotential bonding. Yeah, many debate I've had in the past with gas engineers over bonding of the electrical installation. In each consumer's installation in a building, extraneous conductive parts liable to introduce a dangerous potential difference shall be connected to the main earth terminal by protective bonding conductors. You're not too dissimilar there. We go back to BS 6891 because there's a requirement for bonding in clause 8.4.3.1. So both documents agree that extraneous conductive parts liable to introduce danger of potential insulation shall be bonded. So we're in agreement there on that particular standard. But out in the field, there's always those little bit of discrepancy. So there we've got a gas service which has been bonded. Now, what does BS 7671 say, though? And what does 6891 say? Let's have a little look at that. Well, with inside BS 6891, if, for example, John, you were out doing an audit and you come across a scenario, you're out doing a gas service as a gas engineer, and you come across a scenario where you cannot find the protective bonding conductor to the gas service, you'd have to issue the customer one of these notices up on the screen there, wouldn't you? So you'd have to issue one of these. So there is a process in place for gas engineers if they do come across that scenario. I think the appeal here today, or the best appeal we can get is, from your side of things, is to electricians, please try to make it as accessible as possible. You don't have the luxury of conducting a test or anything like that, but where practical, if you can make it accessible, then the gas engineer can go by and tick on their inspection schedule on their gas certificate that there is actually a gas bond in place. Often you do find that they're not accessible, don't you?
Right. Yep.
Okay. So that's an example. Notice this is contained within 6891, which the gas engineer needs to give to the customer if they come across a scenario where there's no bonding in place. As we said, moving on then, what does BS 7671 say? Regulation 544.1.2 says the main protected bonding connection shall be made as near as practicable to the point of entry of that part into the premises, where a meter isolation point unit is found, connect to the consumer hard pipework and before any branch pipework, and where practical, within 600 mil of the meter outlet or point of entry to the building. That's what BS 7671 says. And again, as I say, from experience, I've had many debate with gas engineers around where the bond should be and what have you. I have to say, if you look at them, they're not too dissimilar. This is what 6891 says, clause 8.4.3.2. Connection shall be made as near as practicable to the point of entry of the premises before any branch pipework. Sounds familiar. Internal meters. So you have an internal meter within 600 mil of the meter outlet union. And for outside meters, compartments, the bonding should preferably be in the premises and within 600 mil of the point of entry to the premises. But I think the appeal here today is, John, please make it as accessible as possible.
Yes, and where I am unable to see it on a gas audit, for example, what I'll typically do is I'll state on the audit report that it is not visible. It's not to say that it's not there. In most cases, it probably is. It's perhaps behind a wall, under a floorboard, that kind of thing, but it's not entirely visible. And as you correctly say there, I'm ideally looking for it to be within 600 millimeters or before the first branch. However, it can be as close to the point of entry as possible. It seems to be that close to the point of entry at times seems to be subjective, depending on who the electrician was. But however, it should be as close to the point of entry as possible. Not several feet or meters away from the point of entry. So it's quite important that we sort of highlight that.
Yeah, and just to touch on some of the electrical sides for those you out there. So I'm sure most of you are aware of the document Best Practice Guide 4. It does mention a C3 where the bonding connection is not accessible. So inside Best Practice Guide 4, we are advised as electricians to give that a C3 where the bonding connection is not accessible. Obviously, we have the luxury as well, unlike you guys, of giving it a little test as well, that we can use a test instrument to see whether there actually is a connection there. But yeah, not too dissimilar then between the two trades. I don't feel anyway, in my opinion. Moving on to one of our last sections here, which is on carbon monoxide alarms, and obviously here in partnership with Select, we're doing a specific piece on Scotland. We're also talking about one of the British standards as well. So carbon monoxide alarms in Scotland, the tolerable standard was amended by the Housing Scotland Act 1987, tolerable standard extension of criterion, order 2019, which came into effect on the 1st of February 2021. From February 2022, all homes, private ownership, private landlords, local authorities, social providers should have complied with the requirement to install a carbon monoxide alarm where there is a fuel burning appliance or flue. In terms of the building regulations, John, what does the building regulations say? So that's obviously the main standard across Scotland, but in terms of the building regulations, so where you're fitting a new fuel burning appliance or replacing a fuel burning appliance, again, requirement for a carbon monoxide detector.
Yeah, and just to extend on that, Calum, the carbon monoxide alarm in Scotland does not need to be hardwired. There's not a requirement for it to be especially hardwired. It can be a battery operated sealed unit as well.
Okay, so yeah, okay, so may not be electricians fitting the carbon monoxide alarms then, but again, the advice really out there for anyone watching today, if you come across a scenario where you've got a fuel burning appliance and there's no carbon monoxide, advise your customers, advise your clients upon that. So yeah, that's quite. But we go back. That's been a requirement now in Scotland since February 2022. So quite a while now on that one. I said you got the technical handbook there, the building standard technical handbook. We've got the requirements there. But one that often doesn't get spoke about much in terms of carbon monoxide. I don't know whether anyone has come across this one before, but it's one that's a little bit in the dark in terms of carbon monoxide alarm. You don't tend to see it too often. It's BSCN 50292 2023, or mention it too much, shall I say, in the electrical industry. Is a best practice guide and is applicable to domestic premises, boats and caravans. So in terms of 50292, quite similar to the 5839 series that we have for fire alarms. So a best practice guide, John, what does that really relate to? What's the main criteria behind the best practice guide?
Well, the best practice guide seeks to ensure that the effectiveness of the carbon monoxide alarm is that safety remains paramount. Quite often, what we've got to remember is that if we have an escape of natural gas, or we have an escape of carbon monoxide in natural gas installations, because natural gas is lighter than air, it will tend to rise in these circumstances. And if we were to incorrectly site a carbon monoxide alarm, then quite often we could have literally a fatality before the alarm started to sound. So in order, again, to safeguard life, we have to ensure that we're following the best practice, and very importantly, in conjunction with the specific manufacturer's instructions, which for those who amongst us today have fitted these alarms in properties, they can vary greatly in their siting requirements. I've even had scenarios where we've had the same manufacturer produce different models of carbon monoxide alarms, where the installation characteristics are quite different in terms of where they should be, away from ceilings, walls, drafts. Ideally, we should be seeking to fit a carbon monoxide alarm both by using the British standard and specifically, very importantly, with the manufacturer's instructions. Again, coming across a lot of scenarios out there, just to give you a flavour of what I see out there. I see battery operated and hardwired alarms installed incorrectly in cupboards that house gas appliances, or too low to the floor. Now, bear in mind that natural gas rises, then it will have quite a bit of trouble detecting carbon monoxide in that scenario, before it's too late. Yeah. So ideally, we're looking to site detectors. Rule of thumb is above the level of any windows and doors and away from any drafts or direct sources of heat, like directly above a radiator, for example.
Yeah, thanks, John. I mean, like I said, it's important to reckon. Also, we've got the minimum standards mentioned there previously. So we've got the minimum standards. This is a best practice guide. It may go above, but it is there for a reason. That guidance is out there to promote best practice and give designers a real choice in their selection of how they manage the escape of carbon monoxide. Okay, so some of the key points then from the 50292 standard. This was refreshed into 2023. Carbon monoxide alarms to be installed in a room where people spend most of the time, similar to the fire alarm one, i.e. your living room. That tends to be where people spend the majority of their time, so they recommend one in there. Carbon monoxide alarm to be installed in a room where people sleep is the recommendations. Carbon monoxide alarm to be installed in any room where a flue runs through it. So that could be a couple of areas, I suppose, John. There could be a few scenarios. That could even be potentially a loft space, I suppose, in some scenarios.
Absolutely.
Carbon monoxide alarm to be installed in rooms that are not normally frequented but have a fuel burning appliance, e.g. a boiler room. And carbon monoxide alarm to be installed in humid rooms that have a fuel burning appliance, e.g. bathroom. But we have caveat that needs to be confirmed as suitable by the manufacturer for that purpose. Probably quite rare you do come across that scenario, John. Do you agree? But if you do, then you've got an option now potentially.
Yeah, potentially. More often than not, I see the, the the sort of normal scenario I come across out there is where the carbon monoxide alarm will be sited outside the bathroom and above the door where the boiler is housed, in, for example, a bathroom cupboard. Bearing in mind we can only fit room sealed appliances in bathroom cupboards, it's no longer permitted to fit the old conventionally fluid, open fluid type of appliances found commonly in yesteryear. In that scenario, that's completely outlawed now.
Okay, thanks, John. Much appreciated. And sort of finishing up this section, just to give you a highlight of the things we found out in the field around carbon monoxide alarms installed. There's a little bit more from the standard there. Carbon monoxide alarms in rooms that are not normally frequented should be interlinked to other alarms, e.g. smoke alarms, but the same pattern needs to be different. That comes from the standard, but again, you need to check with the manufacturer that they are suitable for that purpose as well, in terms of your alarms. And this is one that you find there, John, quite often. This is one of your pictures, isn't it? That you found out in the field.
Yeah,
1 to 3 meters, that comes from the standard.
It does, and it's more also found almost universally in the manufacturer's instructions as well. And as we know, Calum, that normally by following the likes of the British standard, you'll usually be there or thereabouts in terms of the manufacturer's instructions, but it's always good to use them together in unison. But in this scenario here, we've got clearly a picture of an appliance and we have the carbon monoxide alarm, and it's sited, about a foot or so away from the appliance. In this scenario, what can and often does happen is that it can give us false alarms. So it can give us a false positive of carbon monoxide and dangerous levels being present when in fact there isn't. Again, another scenario I come across out there is battery operated units sitting directly on top of the gas appliance as well. That should be avoided as well, and it should be recited per manufacturer's instructions in conjunction with the British standard.
Yeah, thank you, John. And the other bit there, just point out 300 mil from walls and obstructions as well, which is one that you often see as well out there in the field. Okay, thank you very much. Just sort of a summary from myself, and to thank you all for your time today, and we'll take some questions in a moment. Breaches of Regulation 8, as John has explained, are punishable with fines and in some cases imprisonment. So it's something to be mindful when you're out there working in and around gas installations. Observations related to the gas industry are not applicable to BS 7671. Thankfully, for different scenarios you may come across out in the field, as you are members of Select, they've got a document here that you can use for observations worthy of a note associated with an EICR. So if you do come across different scenarios that you feel is worthy of a note, Select have got you a document there that you can use as a Select member. And I think a lot of the message that we gave over today, if you are in any doubt, as John has alluded to a couple of times, seek guidance. If you're not a gas engineer, you may not know how to, competently make a decision in certain scenarios. Very unlikely you are going to be able to anyway. So seek that guidance, ask a gas engineer, get a gas engineer to the installation, check with you, make sure that you are you do not want to fall foul of things like Regulation 8, as for the reasons John has explained. That's me, and that's John there. Or email us if you have any queries or questions about anything we discussed today. Equally, check out our website, www.corgitechnical.com. That's got all the training, the consultancy things. Any queries or any questions, anything we discussed today, though, please feel free to contact us. And as I said, please look at the website. Now is our opportunity for questions. Before I do, though, I'm just going to pick a question up with John that we often get asked. When we talk about the distances from pipework to consumer units, John, if you were to come across as a competent gas inspector out in the field, what would you assign that? What are we talking? At risk? Are we talking ID, not to current standard? What would you assign that in general?
It would be assigned not to current standards, and the only caveat to escalate that to an at-risk situation would be evidence of scorching, arcing, or deterioration of the surfaces and surrounding area.
Great, thank you, John. Much appreciated. Okay, back to yourself then, Bob.
Yeah, there was a couple of things that occurred to me just while you were talking. One was with regard to the distance from a fan a ventilator from the appliance, the combustion appliance. I was wondering if there was any information in the fan manufacturer's instructions. I had a wee look just while you were talking about that. Specifically, I had a wee look at I think it was Expelair's range of fans, and they mention it, but they don't give a dimension, just to be clear. Again, I thought maybe manufacturer's instructions, which is commonly something that electricians would follow, might look at it. It simply says exhaust air must not be discharged into a flue used for exhausting of fumes from appliances supplied with energy other than electric. Requirements of all authorities concerned must be observed for exhaust air discharge and intake flow rates. So interesting, that 300 mil dimension that you provided there. Just as a wee reminder, did that come from the British Standard, John?
British Standard, there's two parts to British Standard 5440. We have part one, which is flues, and the second is ventilation. Now, what we should be seeking to ensure is a minimum of 300 mil. Now, again, the manufacturer's instructions of the appliance, the gas appliance concerned, will indicate any distances specific to that appliance to any points of ingress or potential ingress into the property. It can also be found in the British Standard, and that is on the assumption that the appliance is a fan assisted, one of the more common modern types of appliance. However, that distance will increase even further or greater than 300 mil if it's the old sort of balanced flue, square fluid type of boilers that we used to have out there, and there is still some out there, and the distances normally away from points of entry into the building need to be, you know, greatly increased. And again, you'd be referring to the British Standard in that case, or more specifically the manufacturer's instructions.
And I presume the reason for that would be the possibility of polluting the air going into the appliance so that it doesn't combust properly.
Well, you're talking about extractor fans there, and basically what happens is when you light your boiler or your gas appliance, and for example your kitchen, it discharges products of combustion, fumes that contain carbon monoxide, one of the byproducts of the combustion process. And clearly, for example, on a windy day, you don't want those fumes blowing back into the property and potentially.
So more from the problem is more from the combustion appliance rather than the fan.
Yes.
That was one thing that occurred to me. The other thing was with regard the best practice BS 50292, and the interlink, the suggestion of best practice to interlink the alarm, carbon monoxide alarm, with the smoke alarms.
Yep.
And I noticed that there is guidance. Obviously, repairing standards quite a significant thing in Scotland for electricians carrying out work for private landlords. And in section D there, they've got requirements for the gas installation, which mentions carbon monoxide. But then you go to section J with regard to the actual installation of the carbon monoxide, and it does mention there that the repairing standard does not require carbon monoxide detectors to be interlinked or to be interlinked with fire alarms. So again, there's no requirement for it, but as you quite clearly said, it's best practice. Most British standards, British European standards, are recommendations only, although
right.
BS 7671 is a slightly different kind of standard. But you know, just to be aware of that if you were referring to the repairing standard, it doesn't actually mention that. Yeah.
It's a valid point. Yeah, like we said, you know, it's best practice, isn't it? So you can
best practice.
You can choose to do it, or you can it's quite common, as you said. You know, you may well have scenarios out in Scotland. You're allowed just to fit one battery alarm if you want, a long life battery, and you're done, aren't you? So you can do that as well. So no even need for a connection there, is there? Do you know what I mean? A battery alarm. So lots of different options there out there for people to comply with the minimum legislation.
Well, thanks very much, Calum and John, for that interesting overview of the factors that electricians should consider when they're in and around gas appliances for gas safety purposes. I'm sure those who've attended today's webinar have found that interesting. I don't see any further questions being raised on the Q&A button. So if that's everything, I think that just draws us quite neatly to the kind of 1 hour mark, and thanks everybody for taking the time to attend. As I say, hopefully you found it of interest, and you know, if there are any questions, Calum and John are more than happy to deal with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much.